All right, welcome back, Little Warrior Churchers. Time for another daily Bible reading. It is September the 21st, about 6:21 in the morning. If you could go ahead and like the podcast wherever you're at and join the Facebook group. And now there is a new app where you don't have to do any of that. You can just download the app and there you go. Has everything on there for you. Let's go to Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for everything you've given us. Help us understand what we're about to read today as we go through it. Name I pray. Amen. All right, we're going to be starting the book of Esther. You can bring your atheist friends. You can bring your agnostic friends, because this book is non-religious. Doesn't even mention God once. It's pretty interesting. It's a very interesting book. It is very necessary book. This book takes place between, if you've been following along with us, it takes between the book, chapter 6 of the book of Ezra. And a lot of the Jews did not want to leave Babylon because the Persians invaded Babylon and they took over. A lot of the Jews did not want to leave Babylon because they liked it there. And Esther was one of them. So we're going to be looking at not a Jewish nation, but a pagan nation. But what we're going to read in here is going to be very controversial. So just keep in mind that this is not a nation that is holy. It's very pagan. So let's get on with it. Book of Esther. There we go. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Susa, the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his princes and his servants, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. He displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty. Many days, even 180 days. When these days were fulfilled, the king made a 7-day feast for all the people who were present in Susa, the palace, both great and small. In the court of the garden of the king's palace, there were hangings of white and blue material, fastened with cords of fine linen of purple to silver rings and marble pillars. The couches were of gold and silver on a pavement of red, white, yellow, and black marble. They gave them drinks in golden vessels of various kinds, including royal wine in abundance, according to the bounty of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had instructed all the officials of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So there is a feast that the king is putting on, and now the queen is putting something on for the women. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he's pretty much drunk, he commanded Miriam, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abitha, Zethar, and Zarchus, the 7 eunuchs who served in the princes of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king wearing the royal crown, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was beautiful. But the queen Vashti refused to come to the king's commandment by the eunuchs. Therefore the king was very angry, and his anger burned in him. Now, we don't know exactly why she didn't come in, but a lot of people suspect he he wanted the queen to come in just her crown, if you catch my drift. It could be that, but it also could be that she was just like, these people are drunk and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Could also be that. My opinion is I think he probably just wanted her to come in a crown because, well, there you go. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for it was the king's custom to consult those who knew law and judgment. And next to him were Kashina, Shethar, Adamatha, Tarsha, Meres, Marsina, and Markanan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law, because she has not done the bidding of King Ahasuerus by the eunuchs? Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not done wrong to just the king, but also to all the princes and to all the people who are in the province of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will become known to all women, causing them to show contempt for their husbands when it is reported. King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she didn't come. Today the princes of Persia and Media who have heard the queen's deed will tell the king's princes. This will cause much contempt and wrath. They're pretty much saying something has to be done. If the women hear about this, they're going to start treating their husbands with contempt. If the queen could do this to the king, why can't all the other women to their husbands? So they're talking as men, saying something has to be done. Verse 19, if it pleases the king, let the royal commandment go from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it cannot be altered, that Vashti may never come again before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another who was better than she. When the king's decree, which he shall make, is published throughout all the kingdom, for it is great, all the wives will give their husbands honor, both great and small. So there's something interesting about the Persian Empire. The king was he had a very big temper, and he put a lot of rules on a lot of people, including himself. For instance, when he signed a document, he could not go back and unsign it. We see this in the book of Daniel. The king signed a decree to put Daniel in the lion's den. He was tricked, and he couldn't go back and unsign it. He didn't want Daniel to go into the lion's den. In fact, he stayed at the gate in the morning because he wanted to see if Daniel survived, and Daniel actually did survive. But we can see that the law was that if he signed something, he could not go back and unsign it. So let's go to chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was pacified, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what decree against her. Then the king's servants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the beautiful young virgins to the citadel of Susa, to the women's house, to the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the woman. Let cosmetics be given to them, and let the maiden who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The thing pleased the king, and he did so. So he's pretty much throwing Vashti away because of this one deed, and he's going to get a new queen. Like I said, this is a pagan nation. This is not the Jewish people. They don't worship Yahweh. There was a certain Jew in the citadel of Susa whose name was Mordecai. Now, if you do the research, you find out that Mordecai is Jewish, and he is a descendant of the man back in 1 Samuel who was throwing stones at David. The men asked David, what is this guy throwing stones at you and cursing you? Let me go cut off his head. And David said, no, let him keep doing it. So David spared this man's life. So we can argue that if David had killed that guy, then Mordecai wouldn't even be here to do what he does. So those are the kinds of things that you can learn when you study the history, when you study the names and the genealogies, which is pretty interesting. If David hadn't, saved that guy because he was cursing the king, which is a big no-no, he said, let him curse. Let's go to Mordecai, the son of Jar, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, the Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. He brought up Heshdah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was fair and beautiful. And when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. So Mordecai is looking after this young lady. So when the king's commandment and decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together to the citadel of Susa to the custody of Haggai, Esther was taken to the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. The maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness from him. He quickly gave her cosmetics and her portion of food and the 7 choice maidens who were to be given her out of the king's house. He moved her and her maidens to the best place in the woman's house. Esther had not made known her people nor her relatives, because Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make it known. Mordecai walked every day in front of the court of the woman's house to find out how Esther was doing, and that would become of her. So the king instantly likes her. She must have been incredibly beautiful, because he instantly likes her, and he actually gives her 7 choice maidens just to take care of her. Verse 12, each young woman's turn came to the king Ahasuerus after her purification for 12 months. For so were the days of the purification accomplished, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months of sweet fragrances, and with preparations for beautifying women. The young woman then came to the king like this: whatever she desired was given to her to go with her out of the women's house to the king's house. In the evening she went, and the next day she returned into the second woman's house to the custody of Sheshagaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She came into the king no more, unless the king delighted in her, and she was called by name. That is incredibly important for the story. If you came into the king's presence through the doors without him calling you, that was punishable by death. And we're going to see that in this book, and that's why it's a big deal. If she were just to walk into the king's palace through the doors and come talk to him, that was punishable by death. Verse 15. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, came into the king, she required nothing but Haggai, the king's eunuch, the keeper of the women, advised. Esther obtained favor in the sight of all those who looked at her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she obtained favor and kindness in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So she was beautiful not only outside but inside. There was something very beautiful about her character and her personality as well. 18. Then the king made a great feast for all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her relatives nor her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai like she did when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Taresh, who were doorkeepers, were angry and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. Can't say the name. This thing became known to Mordecai, who informed Esther the queen, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. When this matter was investigated and she was found to be so, they were both hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So Mordecai found out that these 2 men were going to kill the king. He tells Esther, and Esther tells the king. We can see that Mordecai did not get a reward for his doing at that time. Something must have happened with the paperwork or something, but he did not get the reward. Chapter 3. After these things, the king Cyrus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. All the king's servants who were in the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. Haman is the villain of the piece. He comes from King Agag. King Agag. Who is King Agag? King Agag was the ruler who tried to defeat Saul. God commanded Saul to kill Agag and his all the land. Unfortunately, King Saul left King Agag alive to pretty much be his servant. So King Agag had heirs, and if Saul had killed Agag, then Haman wouldn't be here. He wouldn't be the villain, pretty much. Let's keep on reading. But Mordecai didn't bow down to pay him homage, and that's why. Then the king's servants who were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's commandment?" Now it came to pass, when they spoke daily to him, and he didn't listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai didn't bow down or pay him homage, Haman was full of wrath, but he scorned the thought of laying hands on Mordecai alone, for they had made known to him Mordecai's people. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Assyrius, even Mordecai's people. You can see that Haman has a very big hate for the Jews, and that's why the Jews defeated his people, probably left him in poor. His whole family was poor. Now the king has uplifted him and gave him a title. Verse 7, in the first month was the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, and chose the 12th month, which is in the month Adar. Haman king said to the king Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdoms, and their laws were different from other peoples. They don't keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to allow them to remain. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who are in charge of the king's business to bring into the king's treasuries." The king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. The king said to Haman, "The silver is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Haman really has a big hate for the Jews, and it's because of what happened with Saul with King Agag. Verse 12, then the king's scribes were called into the first month on the 20th day of the month, and all Haman commanded was written in the king's local governors, and to the governors who were over every province, and to the princes of every people, to every province according to its writing, and to every people in their language. It was written in the name of the king Ahasuerus, and it was sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent to couriers into all king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the letter that was decreed would be given out in every province was published to all the peoples, and that he should be ready against that day. The couriers went out to haste by the king's commandments, and the decree was given out in every citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was perplexed. It's just like a Hitler all over again. Why they wanted to kill the Jews, who knows? They just wanted to. Haman hated the Jews, and it's because of what happened with Saul. And there's no reason for this, but he wanted to do it. They sat down and drank and were happy that they had a decree to kill all the Jews. So why is the book of Esther in the Bible? It doesn't mention God. It doesn't mention anything religious. It's to show that even though Esther stayed in Persia, that she had a very big role to play, because the Jews went back to Jerusalem to build the house of God. And if Esther had not stayed back, then Haman would have conquered all the Jews. Whew. All right, let's go to Proverbs, and then we'll be done. Proverbs 21. 19 through 20. It is better to dwell in a desert land than with a contentious and fretful woman. There is precious treasure and oil in dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up. There you go. Choose a good woman. Pretty much. There you go. All right. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for everything you've given us. Help us understand what we just read, these 3 long chapters, but it was well worth it. That we may learn something from the book of Esther, that you protect your people, and that you promise to do what you set out to do. Be with us today as we go on through this day. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, guys, thank you for joining me. I know it was a long chapter, but Esther is a really good book. It reads like a novel, so just keep up with it, and it's a good book. And I'll see you later. Bye.